Hello and welcome to Critical Faculty. I'm your host, Hani Salim. In the month of July, I've vowed to focus on Christianity and Judaism. And I've had a couple of people who focus on this area with me. But I've got a gentleman who's been subject to hundreds and hundreds of conversations with Christians and theists alike. And I would love to get the perspective of a very dear friend of mine, Derek Lambert. Hello, Derek. How are you?
Hey, my brother. Thank you for inviting me back, man.
It's been ages, and I think the last time we've had a conversation probably was on your channel about probably 18 months now. Time flies.
It's been a while. Yeah. How you doing?
Oh, do you know what? I stopped broadcasting for I forgot to tell you that offline, for about 8 months.
I noticed.
Completely stopped and start reading again, but then the area where I broadcast the most in Arabic is well in need of science and philosophy and new information. So I'm back out of my shell.
Hey, I'm glad to see you back, man. You hit me up and you're like, "Hey, want to talk about Jesus?" I'm like, "That guy? I guess I'll talk about Jesus."
He's such an amazing story. I mean, the greatest story ever told, some would say. Can you see my screensaver here?
Yeah.
See the handout. I like Jesus. I like the story. The story, and we're going to delve into the C.S. Lewis slogan that I've got there on the video.
Yeah.
It's the savior complex. It's Superman. It's Moses. Yep. It's I'm going to borrow from Jordan Peterson's the archetype of the savior. What do you think? What do you think of Jesus?
Oh man, there's so many aspects that you can approach. Because what I try to do is understand what the materials seem to be saying to the original audience, or at least what the author is trying to do by writing this material. And what I try to do the best I can. Hey, Lisa. We got Wendyberg in the house. The motherfucking Wendyberg. Good to see her here. What I try to do is understand what they may have been trying to do at the outset. Not necessarily what, centuries later thinkers thought about Jesus. That's all cool, fun and dandy. We like to check that out. But I like to try and understand what the New Testament seems to be saying. And there are many different voices, and it doesn't seem to have the same identical view or lens to how to view him. Right now I'm working through an interesting documentary, actually. I'm hoping to have it done within the next week, called Yahweh, the Dying and Rising God. Yahweh, not Jesus, not Dionysus, not Attis, not Adonis, not Tammuz, not Inanna, no, Yahweh, the Old Testament deity. Now, where's that myth at, right? So I'm wanting to expose people to stuff I don't think they've ever heard before in their entire lives in this documentary that shows Yahweh was actually a dying and rising God. The ancient Israelites believed that about him, like all the other Canaanites and the Amorites, the Arameans, the Assyrians did it with their gods, the Mesopotamians or Babylonians. Like, I'm trying to show that there's some fossils in the Old Testament that God actually dies and rises in the language and the practices, the rituals of the Israelites. So why did Jesus have to come and die and rise? Well, if you just read the Old Testament and see laying out the red carpet, you'll see the continuity as to why they would have had Jesus also portrayed as a dying and rising God. Factor in that the neighboring cultures, the Greeks, you go up north and you'll start seeing a lot of people in the region that Paul's actually going for to convert. Their god, Attis and Cybele, dies and rises. And guess when this happens? Guess when it happens, Hanny? When they celebrate his death and resurrection.
Oh, sort of April, March.
Yes.
Yeah, around Easter.
The
Yeah.
22nd.
Yeah.
Literally. It's it's literally the spring equinox.
Yeah.
So the same time of the year that the Jews are celebrating Passover and the new year starts, the month of Nisan, is the very same time that Attis, another god, a Phrygian deity, that Romans are now making a universal Roman-wide cult. They're celebrating it publicly every year under Claudius.
Nissan, not to be mistaken for Nissan Sunny, the car. You know, so a lot of people might think you're thinking about something. But you know what? Maybe Jordan Peterson is onto something here, and I know the guy is a bit weird and everything, but few of the stuff he says has got some traction. You know, so we talked about the resurrection. You know, there are themes in the human story. We talked about the savior complex, the savior. What about, you know, resurrection? Isn't that redemption? You know,
yeah, in a sense it is. I mean, it starts off ultimately as nature. I mean, humans, if you just go back, constellation Pegasus in the house.
Yeah, with his very interesting questions and you know, they're always very different. Constellation Pegasus.
I'd like to see a video on Wicca. Seems to me there are many dead end origins of it. The ever-changing pentagram and is it Baphomet? I'm not sure how you Baphomet. I don't want to mispronounce it, but Baphomet I think is interesting, and I would like to do that as well. In fact, this was brought up by Wendy, the motherfucking Wendyberg. We spoke on the phone yesterday or day before, and she wants, you know, diving more into this.
So is that like the witchcraft elements inside sort of Christianity, and you know, the sort of?
I think it's just even Wicca and this more of those ancient myths that tie into modern, really
so pagan, yeah, beliefs.
Yeah. But your question about resurrection, right? Apologists like to capitalize or monopolize what resurrection must mean. Very limiting to what can be considered resurrection. And if we use their definition, which is that a person dies and then comes back to life, there are many examples before Jesus. They like to pretend they're not there. Many examples before Jesus where this is the case. I have one that is actually talking about Heracles, Melkart, the Phoenician version of Heracles. He dies. They take a bird, and they put it in front of his face as he's dead, and he comes back to life. This is after Typhon, the storm deity, the Tiamat, the Leviathan version of the chaos dragon, kills him, and he comes back to life. And I'm talking about alive again. I'm talking about really alive. You get the hints of this in Herodotus, book 4, I believe it is, paragraph 94, if my memory serves me right. You get this Zalmoxis guy who disappears into the underworld. Now, mind you, Herodotus does not believe in Zalmoxis, so he's writing in a sense like they believe he really died and went into the underworld, but he was just in a cave under the ground for 3 years, and he comes out on the 4th year. So anyway, they believe he died, went into the underworld, which is a catabasis. Jesus had a catabasis. Jonah had a catabasis. Jonah was swallowed in the belly of the whale, that giant fish, which is considered Mot. It's death. It's Leviathan. It's Tiamat. It's Typhon. It's wherever the culture is. If there's a chaos enemy of the deity, the hero, this is it. And it swallows him and takes him down. Now, funny thing is with Jonah, this fish, which might be, it's a ketos in Greek, a giant ketos, which is like a sea monster, but it's controlled by God. So it's like even God controls the chaos here, and he causes him to be swallowed. And in chapter 2 of Jonah, he says, I'm in Sheol. I'm in the underworld. I'm in death. So there's a constant reflection of resurrection in a literal sense, and in sometimes in a cyclical nature sense. We all experience resurrection. This is why it touches the core fabric of all humans, I feel. This is
Yeah,
why I think the story resonates, because the same way that the next year comes and life's coming back, and the same way death is coming back as well. The constant battle between good and evil, light
do
and
you know
darkness.
exactly right? That's why I'm not a big fan of things being copied. A lot of people say, this religion copied exact serves. I think humans are able to come up with the same theme because we have evolved the same way. Imagine modern day movie, and there's like good and evil, and good is just winning the entire movie. You'd be bored. There have to be a moment where evil is winning, and goodness is just a little bit weaker before it comes back again. Even
Right.
Superman gets killed and
Well,
gets
this has been a debate.
resurrected.
What you're talking about has been a debate for a long time among scholars. Scholars go, okay, these might be fundamental truths. Carl Jung would have them as archetypes.
Mm.
That humans inherently, if you were on an isolated island, you and your family were literally, you were born, let's pretend, and they taught you nothing but a little language to know how to communicate with each other. And say there's 20 people, they take you to an island and drop you off. They just teach you basic, fundamental, like how to get food, how to communicate, how to count, basic stuff. No myth, no legend, no God, no nothing, right? There's this inherent archetype built into humans and their consciousness, even if we evolved with it, or if you want to say it's God-given, this is how they might view it. You're going to inevitably shape your world based on your experience, your observation of nature, and therefore you're going to see a commonality in whatever you structure in your cultural, religious perception, in the way you portray the world, and it's going to have overlap with well-known myths or stories from other cultures. Now, they think that this is mostly inherited, like naturally. And then you have the other school of thought who says, yeah, there might be some of that, but like you really are misunderstanding how humans work. We are a social creature. We are meant to communicate. And if you do not factor in the fact that borrowing and exchanging of ideas and mythic tropes and all of this in a religious sense is inevitably, if not even a primary part of how cultures dominate each other or even inherit those motifs, you're missing out a huge factor. So for me, when I read and hear about Typhon, right, which is the Greek enemy, the Greek chaos dragon, and then I read about Leviathan, and then you go up to Hittites or you go into other regions, they had a Lotan in Ugarit. By the way, Lotan and Leviathan are the same, different names for the same thing. So where I'm going with this is to say that you're going to inevitably have these chaos creatures. And I do think that there's exchange. I don't necessarily use the term borrow or plagiarize. Like a lot of atheists online will critique, you just ripped it off. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to give a cold hard fact. Israelites were Canaanites, okay? Their religion is Canaanite religion. So when you are reading the Old Testament, you are reading a scribe who's obviously they're reforming Canaanite religion, okay? This is Canaanite religion, though. You are not reading some uniquely, authentically differentiated religion. It is literally evolving out of the earlier regional religion of the land, from the Phoenicians to Ugarit, all along the Mediterranean coast. They picked up and borrowed and changed, and yeah, Yahweh becomes the only guy after a while.
I'm glad you've mentioned the word evolution in there, because I think each religion is a heresy of the one before, or an evolved version of it. Christianity is the same to Islam is to Christianity, and Judaism is exactly the same sort of formation. It's an evolved belief system, and the themes of the human. And when you talked about whether these things were inherited or not, and I think there are both elements are in existence. Mammalia has the same theme. The silverback, to me, the leader of a pack. That's just the primitive version of a savior, or the one who's going to lead us to in Exodus. Moses is a silverback.
That's it. Dude, humans just literally of course, we're good at storytelling. We have language to be able to express these things. But when you see the behaviors, right, it just repeats itself. And I think there is this sense where we've evolved with nature to see the natural way things take place. Chaos or even drought, you can call it chaos, right? Summer months in these regions, dude, the worst. That's why before the Bible, we go back to Ugarit, we go back to Mesopotamia, we go to Assyria, we go up to the Hittites. This region in the summertime, you're not growing crops. There's no food. Now, you and I know evolution has an extremely consciousness itself is probably indebted to food, to survival, and the strive of how do I get more food. Okay, we've talked about this in the past, and I know there's videos out there that describe this in better depth. That is beyond above my pay grade and my knowledge to really express, because I'm not an expert.
Everything's about food at the end of the day.
Food is exactly, bro. So why is it that the myths of Ishtar, Inanna, Damuzid, Tammuz, which it later becomes Adonis, the word Adon is a West Semitic name for Lord, which carries it's the same word where Jews stop using Yahweh or Yahweh Elohim, and they start saying Adonai. Adon, Adonis, the Greek god, Adonai, the God of the Bible. Well, where did this come from? So there's shared linguistics, there's shared culture, but at this time of the year in the summer, they had festivals. They ritualized mourning, crying. They had days where they would cut themselves for Baal. They would literally cut themselves and rip their clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, just like the Bible describes the biblical guys do all the time. And they would cry and wail for God to come back from the dead. Baal died. God died. He forsook them for a moment because the enemy, Mot, which was drought, and in other cases it's Yam. Yam was the Rahab. It was the Leviathan, Tiamat. You're talking about wet and dry. You can have too much water and drown, right? You have no water and die of starvation and drought, right? These are the two opposites that have been mythologized into narrative. And what ends up happening is Baal gets swallowed by Mot. And Mot kills him. Now, the story is interesting. I'm hoping to spell it out in this next documentary. It's really, really cool, the overlap between Baal and Jesus and Baal and Dionysus and all this stuff. So summertime, they wail, but then come autumn. Sukkot. You've heard of the Jewish festival of Sukkot?
Yep.
The Feast of Booths? Okay, this happens in autumn. In fact, this happens, I believe, in the 7th month of Tammuz. Jews have a month named after this god, Tammuz. In their it's like us today having a month named Zeus. Imagine we were purely Christian or a Christian nation. We had a month named after a different god. They literally have a month named after a different god, Tammuz. And in this month, I believe it's that month. If not, it's the next month, which is around October-ish. This is autumn. They would cry on Sukkot, and then 5 days later, they'd celebrate a 1-week celebration in festivities and joy. And by the way, they didn't do this voluntarily. It's a commandment in Leviticus. They have to. And they have to act like they act like they're at a funeral on Sukkot.
Do you know when you said Nisan and Tammuz, these are the Egyptian Coptic calendar names for months. So they actually it's in use. It's currently in use by the Coptic Christians in Egypt.
Exactly.
It's a lot. So this is a great foundation of what we are about to discuss, because we were discussing how the sausage is made, how the story is made, like literally, and I don't think it's a lot of it. It's not deliberate. Some people think some people just sitting down, copying other people's stories and say, let's make a new religion. It doesn't work like that. There's imagine a very ancient world with a lot of questions and not many answers and a lot of misery.
Right.
Spring, equinox.
Yep.
So beautiful. Everything is dead and suddenly there are flowers. The weather is nicer. Everything is. Of course, human had to celebrate that. They can actually experience that. So it has to be accompanied with a story, and that story has to be fantastic because this was the theater of the day. telling stories. Imagine there's no movies, no theater, no so this is sitting around fire and telling stories about legends and heroism and things like that would have been the way to get kids to be inspired and have them bright-eyed and get them to be excited about the future and survive maybe harsh winters.
No doubt. No doubt. By the way, Constellation Pegasus, thank you for the super chat. What
Oh,
about the
thank you very much.
tetragrammaton, pentagram? I wonder if Jews are offended by it. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Worth looking up, though. Thank you for that super chat, brother.
Well, the thing is, there's a lot of sects in Judaism, so there would bound to be one. Even in Islam, there is one that will actually merge some sort of magical stuff with religion. So I'm sure there will be some sort of a weird sect who would sort of endorse it. But classical Judaism probably would not endorse that because they're very strict about no graven images. No, they probably would if you are like an Orthodox Jew. They're afraid from that, but I guess there might be some weird sect who would sort of mishmash magic and God like we've always done.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know where we're going other than to say I want to echo what you said and just say it's like we do Easter today. My kids look forward to looking for Easter eggs. My kids can't wait for Santa Claus to come down with presents. We're not celebrating Jesus in a manger necessarily, but we are having fun playing a little bit of this fiction in these days that are experiential. And I thought about that famous comedian we always laugh listening to. He's like, I'm going to burn you forever and ever in hell and fire and all, but I love you. What's his name? You know who I'm talking about, right? The stand-up.
Is this a stand-up comedian?
Yeah, he's the stand-up guy who'd be like, he goes on and on about how God's going to burn you and torture you and kill you.
Mitch, one of the worst things about getting old is I can see the face and I can't get the name.
You know what I'm talking about. That's I'm sure our audience, at least for the most.
Is he bald?
Yeah, he's kind of bald. Yeah. He's almost like a little bit of hair, but back here.
So there's George Carlin, but there's another one. George Carlin. Okay.
Yep, George Carlin. Well, he said in his stand-up one time, and I thought this was an interesting Freudian slip, so to speak, but not really. I mean, he said, I believe in the sun. I see it. The sun is my God. I see it. I feel it. That's what Aten said. The ancient
the sun with a U, though, right?
Yeah, with a U.
Because the other sun is.
yeah. The light in the sky, right? Which, by the way, is it a coincidence that Jesus constantly is put with a halo of the sun behind his head? Is it also a coincidence he's surrounded by 12? Is it coincidental? Is it purely, they're just borrowing it from the 12 tribe concept? Or is this mythic? Is this potentially hinting at the celestial, the nature cycle of the sun, Jesus, and the 12 months, the zodiac that you find on the floors of Jewish synagogues? I cannot rule this out. I don't lead with this interpretation, right? But I do think that these authors are clever enough, and it's built into the mythos enough to think of why is it that they, even if out the gate, they don't put Jesus on December 25th for being born, but that is the winter solstice. Why is it that they pin him to that date, even if it took a few centuries? Why did they do that just like they did with Sol Invictus, the invincible sun in the Roman Empire? Why are they constantly gravitating toward these celestial markers? Oh, spring equinox. That's when nature and all green comes back and fertility. Oh, winter solstice. We'll put the sun born when the darkest time of the year ends. And now the sun's going to start rising each day more and more till we get to the equinox of spring. Dude, I think there's something to this, bro.
Yeah.
And I think that that's inevitable. So when George Carlin says, I believe in the sun, I can experience it. So did the Aten. So did Akhenaten with the Aten, the sun. He felt it. He experienced it. So there's a sense in which I'm a religious skeptic. Religious in the sense that I don't believe gods are literally real. Religion to me is bigger than just a belief system of I must be superstitious, or I believe in supernatural things or things like that. We're all, in a sense, We have a rhythm and a cycle that is built into nature and how we view the world. And in my definition of religion can encompass that. That's why you have these scholars who are atheists that I've interviewed who practice their religion. And I go, but you don't believe this stuff at all? And I'm like, no, it's my tradition. I just practice it. I take my Sabbaths off. I don't eat pork. I choose not to eat pork. I'm like, but what do you gain from it? It's structure. It gives me meaning and purpose. It's part of who I am. And I'm like, well, damn. Okay. I never really thought about it this way. I never really considered it.
But we are all like that, like cultural Jew. You hear the phrase, "I'm a cultural Jew." I'm an atheist, but I belong to that tribe, and the history and the baggage that comes with the whole thing. Lots of people don't know that I'm actually half Muslim, half Christian, through my mother.
Yeah.
So I do share, but from obviously, I'm no longer a believer. I'm an atheist now.
Right.
The culture, you can leave Islam, but I can remember really nice stuff, the social stuff. And it seems to me that as an atheist, I don't say, hey, religion is the worst idea humanity ever come up with. I think it's actually was very necessary, to believe without evidence at some point, because the truth wasn't necessary at the time. Gathering together in a group, believing in one thing around fire and celebrating was a lot more important than knowing that in quantum mechanics, the electron can act as a particle and a wave at the same time. It was not relevant. Right. So that's why I can appreciate taking some elements from religion. The good stuff. There are a lot of good things from religions, the camaraderie, the group, celebrating over food and drinks. There are great stuff. That's why Christmas is no longer a Christian thing. You can literally appreciate Christmas and go shopping and have the Christmas tree and have gifts, and that's nothing to do with Jesus whatsoever.
Exactly. Well, people make it that. I mean, everything's recycled. That's what's fascinating. There is no there's no whole cloth invention of these materials. And as you said, they're not writing this as like, I'm going to invent a religion right now. There are variations, mutations, to use the term evolution, mutations that cause a new kind of what we call species, right? We like to differentiate, but they're really all connected. And so think of evolution in the scientific sense, but apply this to religion and realize that you're going to, that one ended up with blonde hair instead of black hair. Well, in the genes, something mutated. Well, this tends to happen depending on the social circumstance, whether you're the people that you're friendly with are no longer your friends. So now you're fighting against them. And now you have to have an alternative interpretation. You break away. There's all sorts of stuff that could factor in it. I think this leads to our liar, lunatic, or Lord perspective that Lewis tried to set up, the trilemma. There's so much material there.
Yeah, well, the trilemma, and I call it, it's a false trichotomy. You've heard the logical fallacy, false dichotomy.
Yep.
Because there are other L's. I'm not going to mention L for loser, because that would be quite rude. But I would say, what about legend? I mean, that's an L, and that's very, very naturalistic. And when I say legend, it's not completely made up. Somebody existed, exaggerated later on.
This is what I think, but I don't know. Okay, this is what I think, but I can't prove that that's the case. We can get into that, but Constellation asked, a month called Tammuz in Judaism, is this verifiable to a foreign god? I can't imagine it's not. I would say yes, that the god Tammuz is a significant player in why the name is Tammuz. I can't imagine the etymology is not rooted from the ancient god Tammuz. By the way, Damuzid was the older deity from like Sumerian, ancient Babylonian. And then you end up with Tammuz. You get like the Assyrians, and they're constantly like passing down this deity, which is a fertility, vegetative type deity, but also a shepherd. You know who else was a shepherd, right?
Yeah.
King David. King David. But you know who else was a shepherd, right? Jesus. King Jesus, according to the mythos.
So the two most important professions in the ancient world, being a carpenter or a shepherd, there seems to be linked to prophets for some reason, or somebody who's not employed, really.
Right. Right.
um, so this is quite interesting. So C.S. Lewis, I think it was a mere Christianity in 1950 in the 50s. Wrote the book. C.S. Lewis is the creator of Narnia. Do you know that Aslan, the lion in Narnia, is Jesus? Yeah.
Yes. 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 I love that movie, by the way. That
I
movie
love it
was
too.
amazing.
Look, I mean, I think religion is art,
Yeah.
and religious people are very artistically minded. They can
Right.
create great stuff. I love, and this is where the bridge is built between atheists and the religious communities. Is we can appreciate the story. We don't have to believe. I'll go. Superman is about to be released. The new Superman. I'm not quite convinced. I think I prefer the older, the dark Man of Steel type of, and probably Robert Price would agree with me. By the way,
Yeah.
all these figurines behind me are Robert Price's
Wow.
handmade stuff.
Man,
I got
I've
it
been
from.
in his house. He has so
I know.
many.
I know.
I filmed a video. Did I send you that video? There's like just so many.
He's fascinated by Superman, and
He has
I
3 upstairs rooms full of action figures that he's collected over who knows how many years.
yeah. So I'm about to go to Superman. So it's about to be released, and I'm gonna go and enjoy a couple of hours, get into the story,
Yeah.
and if somebody's creeping from behind Superman, I'm gonna go, "Watch out, Superman!" And I live the story. And by the time I leave, I'm gonna go, "What a fantastic fantasy!" I loved it. I don't have to believe in it.
That's where I'm at.
So yeah,
We can purposely indulge, we can participate in the fiction to enjoy it without needing to believe it, That's where I'm at. And then I also know when there's bad stuff, we can look at it today and go, that's no good, to some things.
I've just looked up Tammuz, and it says actually it is the month Tammuz Hebrew is the 4th month of the Hebrew calendar and has Babylonian origins.
Yep.
Its name and associations reflect a blend of Mesopotamian religion, astronomy, and later Jewish history. So, yeah, it's quite anchored in that sort of era and belief system. Now, C.S. Lewis, a wonderful writer. I enjoy. I mean, it's a lot of it is sort of a lot of atheists would say, "Oh, it's bullshit," and but I do appreciate the art behind it.
Well,
But
if you say Star Wars is bullshit, or if you say Lord of the Rings and they get angry at you, hey, bro, why are you getting upset? Oh, you don't like your fiction being messed with, but they can't have theirs? That annoys me too,
So he posits 3, and that's why we call it a false trichotomy, because there are other options. But let's start with liar, and he said, like, basically his allegations is, you cannot be neutral about Jesus. Jesus is definitive because he claimed to be God, according to C.S. Lewis. I don't know about that, because Bart Ehrman would disagree and would say he was made God later on in different interpretations, but he did not. Maybe John kind of alluded to it, but before that he wasn't really. And he said, you cannot be neutral about Jesus. His claim is so big, you're gonna have to be decisive about it. You got to make up your mind. So he started with liar. Was he a liar, in your opinion?
So this is the problem with the entire trilemma, as you brought up legend, right?
Yeah.
How can you answer this question without knowing what he actually did and said?
Mm-hmm.
The problem with, and Lewis wrote about this stuff, he was not a fan of higher criticism. He was not a fan of textual criticism of these, like Rudolf Bultmann and other scholars at the time. He did not like their picking apart the Gospels and saying, nah, Jesus couldn't have said that. Nah, Jesus didn't do that. This didn't happen. Jesus didn't actually. That was the author's theology, not Jesus. So how can you say Jesus is a liar about this if the author's putting the words in their mouth? Now, that's the first thing I would say. Well, wouldn't liar usually intend motive too, though? So I'd rather say people were mistaken. So if I grant that Jesus said some things that turned out to be wrong, we could call that a lie, especially if people believe in a lie that didn't happen. But if the person is actually convinced
Yeah.
right? This will lead you into lunatic, right? In his view.
Yeah.
But we'll get there. But if the person is convinced, you don't have to be insane or a lunatic. You can just be delusional,
Hmm.
okay? And there are very functional, non-insane, delusional people all throughout the world. They're just wrong. Okay, they're just mistaken.
I'll give you one. I'll give you one example. John Nash,
John Nash.
Nobel Prize winner, mathematician,
Oh, really?
played by Russell Crowe.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, you got to, mate.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's a true story. The guy was a genius, absolute, but schizophrenic.
Well, that would be, if you're schizophrenic, I don't know what category, if that would go into lunatic or something like that for him.
But lunacy. The word lunacy comes from lunar, from the moon. You know there is no such mythical thing. So probably schizophrenia would have been crazy back then.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
anybody with any psychological ailment or disturbances would be dubbed crazy, but they could be, epileptic, or Muhammad used to go into epileptical fits, and they used to think he's crazy, but he wasn't.
Yeah.
He was just had epilepsy.
Well, I agree. I don't even know if it needs humans. I don't know if you need to diagnose them with any particular protocol in order to see that humans can be mistakenly delusional on a belief without them being mentally, oh, we must put this label on them in order for them to have had that kind of experience. You get lots of cult leaders. This leads into lunatic because we talked about liar. I think that there definitely were apocalyptic expectations that they thought the end was going to happen in the New Testament, and it failed. They were wrong. And there's many other historical attestations for this: Millerite movement, Jehovah's Witnesses, Sabbatai Zevi. We can go on and on. Christian.
I mean, you've got your very own narcissist, leading the country.
Yeah.
with the folie de grandeur.
So we I guess what I'm getting at is like, we humans, I think he set up 3 L's here, just poetically, in a sense, because I don't think, as you said, legend needs to be factored in. What did he actually say? But the lunatic aspect, there are many people who claim to be God. And I'm not talking about people you just go to a mental institute and find them in a white padded room who are saying they're God. You can find that in every hospital you go to that is a mental institute. And some of the people in there are going to say, nope, I'm God. Yeah, we know people with mental illnesses do this. But there are people that function and are persuaded based on their environment, their mythos, their belief system, that they may be somehow the chosen one or the divine one. And in some way, they believe that. I thought I was chosen, bro. I thought I was a chosen elect from the foundation of the world, that God chose me as a Christian child of God, and that I was here on a mission to save the world for Jesus Christ. I really believed that I was like, you knew me before you created everything and you chose me. Like, I believed that. Now, if you demand I must go in and they must label me with some kind of mental illness because I was caught up in believing this system, I just think, I guess what I'm getting at with the whole trilemma, bro, is I think humans are messy as hell.
You can say fuck, that's all right.
Yeah. I think we're messy, bro, because I think we can believe our own lies. Okay?
Yeah. Oh, agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah. That tells you, like, it doesn't have to be either or.
There is a say that says the greatest of liars always tell the truth.
The greatest of liars always tell the truth.
Because they believe it so much.
Yeah.
That's why if they put them on that machine, that lying detection thing, they will pass.
I see what you mean.
They actually really believe it, like truly believe it.
Absolutely.
I agree with you. The complexity of the human brain can there's a comment for you here and a suggestion from Constellation Pegasus.
Astronomical observation has to be huge in the Bible, borrowed from earlier traditions. We just talked about the month of Tammuz. That's a Babylonian month. By the way, Babylonians were like huge on astronomy. Okay. Yeah. So if you don't think there's some astronomy built into the myths of the biblical text, I would say think again. Derek, you need to be to New Mexico one day or go to New Mexico, the stars out there look so different. You think you can reach out, pick one out. Wow.
Yeah, that's anywhere in the desert. So if you go to the
Yeah.
desert away from the city lights, yeah, it's gorgeous. I mean, it's absolutely. And there are some areas, especially in Australia, where you watch the aurora and stuff like that near the South Pole. The sky looks just surreal. Like
Yeah.
you think it's almost a religious experience when you watch the sky. It's beautiful. Um,
Wow.
so let's get away. Like, I think C.S. Lewis was a bit clumsy, and I think it's quite simplistic. Let's go to the complexity of the Bible, because
Yeah.
in the Gospels, nobody knew who Jesus was. The guy
Mhm.
was mysterious. Even his disciples was like, scratching their head every now and then. It's like, okay, who the hell is this guy? Like, who is he?
Yeah.
What's your
That's a
reading?
so that's back in 1901, William Raday, I think that's how you pronounce his. It's like a some other language, his name. So I usually butcher it. He wrote a thing called the Messianic Secret,
Mm.
and he made a big theological point. Now, clearly, we've come some distance from that view now with the critical scholarship, but it pointed out what is the deal with Jesus not being identified by his closest companions. How come his disciples didn't know who he was? What's the deal with that, man? Why are we reading a story in from the baptism to his death? They're like constantly bewildered by every miracle and they still don't know who he is. The real question of mark is, who is he, right? But you get that answer right at the beginning. So the author opens up and it tells you the answer. Before you read the book, you get the answer. It's like a play. Someone walks out and goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to tell you the truth about the Son of God, and you're going
Yeah.
to see the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ from its beginning." Walks out,
And
then the curtain opens.
isn't this the one with the interest? We wrote this so you would believe, type of thing. So you,
It is written so people are persuaded. You can
yeah,
tell they're writing a story that is persuasible. They're not using critical thinking. They're not trying to make you question it.
it's a
They're not,
biography.
yeah,
It's a bio.
yeah, but it's mythic. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course. Yeah.
if you want to put some biographical aspects to it, and there are scholars who clearly point out biographical material to it, it's mythic though. It's not like if you read Augustus. If you go read a Suetonius's Lives of the Caesars and you read Augustus, right? You can tell when you're reading something that is not mythic, and you're like, hold on, they're actually pointing out flaws with Augustus. They're like describing things that you would be like, that's not mythical at all. It's just
But you, but you,
mundane.
but even mentioning flaws doesn't constitute
True,
not being
true.
flawed, because in the Quran, Muhammad has been blamed by God.
Right, right,
Sometimes you would think, if you are going to be very clever, like, a bit more clever than the rest of the people, and
right.
they're gonna doubt that this is about you, you will deliberately insert a couple of things where you are blamed, and it's like, oh, if I wrote this, I would have never blamed myself, and you've inserted it yourself.
I would just say go read Caesar Augustus's biography and you'll see what I mean. Because it doesn't open up very beginning. You come out of water and heaven opens and God speaks and angels talk and
Yeah, yeah,
fly. And then
yeah.
at the end of the book, the tomb's empty and an angel comes out of the tomb and Jesus is resurrected. From the beginning to the end, you have supernatural. When you read the Augustus biography or you're reading the biography of Alexander the Great, there is mythic material in these biographies. Plutarch talks about many lives. There's mythic material in these writings, but it is not mythical from start to finish.
Yeah, yeah, of course, absolutely. Yeah, it's earthly,
So,
because the claim isn't, I'm the son of God or I'm God. The claim is, I'm going to be running the biggest empire humanity's ever seen. So it's a different claim, but this is a big claim. I'm God. I'm the son of God. By the way, I had a conversation with Aaron Ra, and we've explored whether Yahweh was Jesus, or were they the same person.
mhm.
And Bart Ehrman also wrote to me, because I've asked him the question, and I saw the article as well that he wrote 5 years ago. He's convinced there are two different people based on scriptural evidence. Now, there is evidence in there say there are two different people. But back to the Jesus story, you can see, especially for those who not familiar with reading the four gospels, in a way that you open one story, the resurrection story, and have the resurrection story opened in the four different gospels to compare. So instead, they will be reading one gospel, finish it, read the next gospel, which is Bart Ehrman does not recommend if you want to critically examine the story. So when you put them together like this, can you see if there's a PowerPoint slide, can you see an evolution of Jesus being a mere man or a perfect man towards being more of a God in John?
I feel like you are getting an evolution. This is where I might personally, I'm not so confident. Like, Bart is very confident about certain things, okay? I've interviewed hundreds of academics, okay? Bart is not the only academic on the block. Very smart, very wicked smart. But when you talk to 100 other scholars on 100 different things, you realize a lot of them aren't, they tell me in private, he's too confident and he's way too like certain. And I don't know if that's our fundamentalist evangelical backgrounds that come out of us to be more certain. Like, he's certain Jesus existed. He's almost certain of these things. And it's like, and I'm talking to other brilliant minds that are going, I wouldn't be so certain. Like, be more nuanced, be more hesitant. For me, I do see an evolution. That evolution, though, I don't necessarily, it becomes clear in John, he's more divine. It's more divine-like, okay? Or at least it emphasizes his divine nature more.
That's why it's called high Christology, I believe. That's the.
But I think it's high right there in Mark. So this is where I might actually echo some of overlap with Christians, okay? When Jesus shows up, he's talking to his Father. Now, we have two forms of Christianity right out the gate that are like many others, variations within these camps. We have this idea that we have proto-Orthodox, which there was no proto, but this is the idea that somehow Jesus fits within the Jewish tradition. And then you have Gnostic type groups who come along and they have different variations from Marcion to Valentinians and such. In this interpretation that Marcion gives, Jesus' father is not Yahweh. Okay, there's different views. Mark paints Jesus doing the very things Yahweh does, right? And many scholars will say, well, Jesus is just an Ish Elohim. Like Elijah, like Moses, Jesus is like those humans on earth doing the will of God. But the way that they paint Jesus is very divine, like he himself is divine. He is somehow God-like, which is odd, because if you go to Paul, based on the chronology that these scholars paint, Paul's the earliest. Paul has Jesus' death cause him to become literally right hand of the Father, a name above every name through whom everyone must call upon to be saved. So, like, you literally have to believe Jesus in order to be saved. That's a big ordeal. You don't have to believe in Moses. You don't have to believe in Elijah. So he's a level of divinity of some kind. And so I'm seeing some continuity between Jesus calming the storm and Yahweh calming the storm in the Old Testament, and literally going, why would it? I mean, what would it offend us? I don't see any offense with claiming the mythical material of the gospel might be presenting Jesus as the Son of God, just like Yahweh was at one point a son of God. Yahweh was a inferior
to
deity under El. He was a son of God. And guess what? Eusebius, quoting Porphyry, who's using Philo of Byblos, a 1st century BCE writer, he was quoting an ancient priest from Phoenicia named Sanchoniathon. And he points out that El, in this ancient Phoenician myth, sacrifices his only begotten son. By the way, his son is a god. He's not a man. He's a god. Now, back then, gods could die and come back to life. The way that after Plato, gods can't die, gods can't have emotions, gods can't lie, gods become almost immutable, perfect. This is the idea. But Eusebius, quoting Porphyry, quoting Philobiblos, quoting Sanchoniathon, uses this myth in his preparation for the Gospels text. And he uses it to try and solidify that Jesus, clearly in line with the earlier prophetic myths that we find, was supposed to die by his father. And by the way, in that myth, El sacrifices his son named Yedud. It's I'm not sure the etymology exactly, but there may be some overlap with the Canaanite Ugaritic pantheon. There's a scholar named Giovanni Garbini. I'm reading for this documentary I'm doing right now. He says in the Ugaritic pantheon, it says El. Let me get you the exact quote. This is some good stuff, bro. Right here. He says, almost there. Okay. Sorry for the quick pause, but this is
no, this is very important. I want to see the hierarchy.
Yeah. Here it is. Okay. So he says, may I read this section briefly just so you get an idea?
Please.
According to Dr. Giovanni Garbini, Yahweh himself was already woven into West Semitic religion long before the biblical scribes began to edit their text. In History and Ideology in Ancient Israel, that's his book, he shows that many names outside Israelite traditions secretly bear Yahweh's name. Consider the hero Joshua of Beth Shemesh. Beth Shemesh was a Canaanite town, and yet his name, Yehoshua, went uncorrected in the oldest text. Or Joram, son of the king Hamath, who should have been scrubbed of any Yahweh connection, but whose name survived, 2 Samuel 8:10. Even Moses' mother, Jochebed, carries two possible forms of Yah. Yah is the phonetic name, the phonetic etymological name for Yahweh, Yah. A detail so inconvenient it was quietly dismissed by some scholars. This is Garbini's writing. Garbini points out that scholars like Noth and Albright, this goes back a century, bro. They're debating this. And by the way, I imagine, even though I know that Bart Ehrman is a New Testament scholar, he dabbles with Old Testament stuff. I imagine he would fit right into the Albright camp. He would probably go right with the typical standard Old Testament view. This guy's critiquing that view. And he says, Albright repeatedly reshaped or ignored these names to insist that Yahweh first appeared only with Israel. When we move to extra biblical sources, the evidence grows impossible to deny. Amorite and Aramaean personal names from 18th century BCE. Dude, that's a long, long time ago, okay? Mari included elements like Yahweh or Yahweh. And Ugaritic myths even preserve a verse where El proclaims, the name of my son is Yah, Y-A-W. And the source I have here, so when viewers can pause, they can go look this up themselves. So here's my point. Yah is a son of a God. Jesus is a son of God. And in a very divine sense, he's a son of God. Not in just the typical Davidic notion where they go, well, David was called the son of God, but he isn't divine. Jesus is seen divine in Mark, Matthew, Luke, in Paul. He's seen as a God, literally as a God. Now, one can argue that that's Hellenistic influences from the Greek world that may have helped them shape this. Yeah. I don't care how you want to paint it, because I think that does play a role, because the Hellenistic world was already being influenced, or at least inspired, by the earlier Near East. Bro, they looked to ancient Persia. They looked to Babylon. They looked to the Assyrians. And there are
actually Zoroastrian effects on Judaism. So I completely agree with you. I think I'm with you on this one here, because didn't we agree just a minute ago that biological evolution is very akin to human ideas? And no species just turn up.
Right.
Like they must have common ancestors and evolved and random mutations and natural selection. The same thing happens to idea. So I find it very difficult to believe that the idea of Christianity was just the first of its own kind. I completely agree that this is an evolution of a theme.
Yeah.
A reoccurring theme taking slightly different shape as it advances.
That's why, getting to your question, I did all of that to say, when I read Mark, I'm not sure. I don't need to be right or to know which one is correct. Oh, he was just a man, but God worked through him as just a man in Mark. Or was he really divine? Was there, in a sense, that he was actually a godlike man, a demigod? It doesn't bother me, whatever perspective you get. It is pretty interesting that you end up with a demigod birth right there in Matthew. And Matthew's using Mark. So if you want to pretend that, well, he wasn't a demigod in Mark, which it literally uses that term at the beginning, the son of a god, this demigod in Mark. He has the clear writing of a mythic birth where a god impregnates a mortal woman, like all the other myths. And man, there's Old Testament text where there's a scholar who wrote a book or article called A Strange Biography of Samson, Yair Zokovich, I believe that was his name. He points out the language of the Old Testament women that were barren, like Sarah couldn't have a child. She was 90 something and she couldn't have, the list goes on and on. Rachel, Sarah, even with Eve in Genesis, Stavrakopoulos, Francesca mentions this and others, that the Hebrew seems to imply that Yahweh himself impregnated her with child.
Wow.
It's not Adam.
So it's
God.
a kind of a divine IVF.
Right. But they scrub, like, it seems like these authors are scrubbing out or toning down the mythical elements of these earlier traditions. And I'm reading Jesus and I see a God man. However you want to interpret that, he's a God man.
I completely agree with you, because a lot of Muslims, actually not just Muslims, people watch the Da Vinci Code and Dan Brown stuff and say, oh, the Nicene Creed is about, they were trying to decide whether Jesus was just a man or a god. And I say, no. The conversation was about what kind of God was he? Was he of an inferior position to God the Father, or
Right.
co-eternal and equal? But he was always perceived to be a God from the very beginning. As you said, Paul predates all the four Gospels.
According to the scholarship. Yeah.
Correct. From the very beginning, he's established as some sort of a divine being, a God. But the conversation was, is he equal? Because he says certain things. Nobody knows the hour. But the Father, there are certain things that is exclusive to the Father, and people start to think, okay, well, is the Father slightly higher in rank then?
Right. That all of that scuffle is later theological debates that I think are ridiculous. And you're going to find different elements. You're going to find stuff that sounds like Jesus is subordinate, which became heretical later. You're going to find stuff where Jesus sounds like he's equal. And you're going to find both.
Yeah,
So
if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Okay.
Yeah. I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. We are one. But there are times in Hebrews, if you read the book of Hebrews, that try to equate him with the Father, or at least sound that way. But then there are places where, no, he's not equal to the Father. But then this is where the fun debate gets, because you're just talking about within the Christianity that totally won out ultimately. Like before these debates were happening, there were debates between who is his father. I mean, his father is not the God of the Old Testament, according to Marcion. Marcion says that's an evil God. Look, he drowned the world. He genocided entire tribes. He's evil. He destroys his own people when he's pissed off because they don't do the right law. So he ends up annihilating his own people. Like, Marcion wrote what modern atheists say all the time on the internet 2,000 years ago, practically. And so we would do really ourselves some justice to maybe listen to a Christian. By the way, Marcion was a Christian. He wasn't a skeptic of Christianity. He had a different version of this. And he was saying, guys, that Old Testament Jewish God is no good. And he made a case why. He even, he's arguing that the father of Jesus is a different father. So whether or not they're on the same level or not skips the whole debate about whether or not this is even the same God as that God. Because they're doing these debates, they already accept, oh yeah, we're accepting the scripture. We accept all the Hebrew Bible. We accept that God's the same God. There were different people with different views, bro. And they were important figures.
Welcome to the supermarkets of religions where everything's available. If you want sushi, there is sushi. If you want mangoes, there are everything. It's crazy. Islam is exactly the same thing. The Quran. You can lean on the beautiful verses and be a very nice, placid Muslim, or you can look for the horrible stuff and be a very harsh Muslim. Same in Judaism.
Yeah.
Christianity is slightly different, but Christianity is written in a way, the Yahweh and Allah, they're very similar. They're black and white. They're like the baby boomers type of dad. You know where you stand. But
They're old school.
Christianity is a new sort of new age dad, kind of a metrosexual. He does not want to upset you, and he's not going to physically hurt you, but he's going to psychologically fuck you up.
There's so much, because I've heard there's an interesting quote from one person who said the New Testament God's actually worse than the Old.
Yeah, I agree. Because the dad who built you, eventually get over it, and he probably apologize to you, say like, sorry, that was the order of the day. I thought I love you, and I thought that was the way. But the one who goes, oh, yeah, mate, you're good, but you're not really good enough. There are these other guys are way better than you, and it just leaves you for you to think about it overnight, and that's horrible abuse to me.
I think it's ultimately the idea of eternal conscious torment idea. That their argument is the Old Testament God would do damage now, on earth, but it'd be temporary. It wasn't permanent. Everyone went to the same place in Sheol, according to this model. Whereas in the New Testament, people who aren't believers, all right, you got wheat in the chaff, you've got sheep, you've got goats. Goats are going to burn up. They're going to be destroyed in an eternal state of misery for all eternity. So that's worse, at least if you play the game that these are real ideas, that's worse.
I like the idea of being a goat, a great of all time.
Yeah, be the goat. But on the evolution point, that doesn't mean there isn't evolution. I even think that it's heightened, that already high Christology of him being a god, a demigod, is more emphasized even more, I think, in John. It's so evident in a different way. But what evolves to me are other issues too. Like they saw problems with the empty tomb aspect, or in Mark, it ends abruptly. There's no long ending. There's no, the women didn't tell anyone. They were afraid. Oh, snap. Yeah. Now Matthew shows up, and Matthew does interesting things. Like in Mark, when the women come to the tomb, the stone's already rolled away.
Yeah.
When you get to Matthew, the stone is not rolled away. In fact, they're there when the stone gets rolled, and he's not in the tomb. Well, according to Richard C. Miller, buddy of mine, real close friend, super wicked smart. I mean, the guy's, he's looking to Greco-Roman examples that are contemporary in the literature of the Gospels, and he's written on this in his book, Resurrection and Reception, and also articles on Mark. The reason they did that, I'll give you an example. If you and me, right, we knew someone was locked up in something that was impenetrable. Pretend it's impenetrable, okay? Mm-hmm. We open it and he's missing. You're going to immediately go, bro, it cannot be. Like it's a miracle. There's no way, right? Well, how did you get out of that is the question. Miller says that at that time in history, people believed that gods could become, they could take on different forms. Mm. They could literally go through walls like a phantom, but they were also physical. This is why the theology called doceticism in early Christianity argued, was Jesus physical? This is before they punched each other in the face. No, he was equal with his father. No, he wasn't. He was subordinate. Like that.
And do you know it's actually allowed in physics? There is in quantum mechanics a theory called the many worlds interpretation by Everett that will allow matter to penetrate.
Really? Look, I'm thinking about how they used to tell me the table's made of atoms, but when I hit it, it's all like solid, but it's like supposedly on a micro level, you could literally go through it. So, I mean, but it's kind of that idea, but gods could take on physical solid form and yet dematerialize and be able to go through walls. Phantoms can go through walls, but they can't take on a solid form. So that's why you see this debate, this theological debate, it looks like in the evolution of these gospels, where once you get to Luke and John, the latest of the four gospels, they're literally having Jesus eat bread and fish after he rises from the dead.
Yeah,
And
he was touched by Thomas. Touched by
touch,
Thomas.
right? Why? Well, there's many reasons why you would do this. It's to prove, hey, I'm not a phantom, I'm not a ghost, which debunks this idea of doceticism, because the Docetists said he was not physical. It appeared that he died on the cross, but he didn't. By the way, we've heard this before by Muslims, okay, where they say they thought it was him, but someone else was crucified instead, right? Well, that comes out of Basilidian Christianity. In the early 2nd century, the Basilidians were believing that Jesus did not actually die, and someone else died in his stead.
In Islam, they reckon it's Judas Iscariot.
Yeah, there are some who say that. In the Gospel of Mark, some actually theorize or hypothesize that, you remember when Simon of Cyrene carries the cross for Jesus?
Yeah.
He shows up out of nowhere and he grabs the cross. The famous Life of Brian movie, at the end,
Monty Python.
It's making a caricature of this belief that some probably thought Simon, and by the way, it's a play on words in these Gospels, in my opinion. Simon Peter, who said earlier in the story, I will go to the death with you. I'll be there at your death. I'm going to die with you.
So Simon of Cyrene. Okay.
Another Simon instead fulfilled his promise that the earlier Simon didn't. So it's ironic. There's irony in this myth where a different Simon is now carrying the cross. But some theorize that the Christians thought, hey, actually, he carried the cross.
I always thought Simon Peters was an odd name, because that's like somebody with a proper family surname. And I believe that back in the day, I mean, Simon of Cyrene makes more sense because your family name is your area, the region where you're born, or your profession. So to have a full name, it sounds like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Maybe they are one and the same in different contexts.
Well, in a sense, they're supposed to be, but they're literally painting them as different, because I'll give you another example of what Mark does that's irony. And this is powerful. This is how you write a hell of a story, bro. This is also why you should be very, very, very cautious when someone tries to pretend, oh, there's history here, or this is historical. No. Just because characters like Pontius Pilate show up, or Caiaphas, which we know existed, does not mean we're reading history at all. In fact, Josephus and Philo of Alexandria and other sources point out how horrific Pontius Pilate was toward Jews. You think he's washing his hands? You think he's actually going to sit here and listen? No, he wouldn't have handled that shit that way. So, okay, in the Gospel of Mark, one example, like I did, Simon Peter's at the Last Supper. He says, Lord, I will go with you to the death. Jesus turns to him and says, Peter, you will deny me thrice before the cock crows. You're not going to go with me to the death. You say you will, and I know you mean well, but brother, you're not going to do it. You're going to deny me. And another Simon, see the irony? Another Simon ends up filling in the shoes. The same way Joseph, the father of Jesus, in tradition would have buried his own son, but a different Joseph named Joseph of Arimathea.
Yeah.
Which means the name Arimathea means something disciple town. Like he's a very, very close disciple. So Joseph of Arimathea buries him. Here's another example, and this one's really obvious to me that there's something going on. Two disciples approach. I think it's John, I can't remember, Andrew and someone else or something, who come to Jesus and they say, Lord, when we enter your kingdom, will you let me and my brothers sit at your right hand and at your left hand in the kingdom? And Jesus is going, you don't get it, do you? The author is really saying you don't get it, because the whole point of entering the kingdom is to die. It is to carry your cross and actually become a martyr. And that's the hard truth about the Gospel of Mark, is that if you're going to be following Christ, you're going to be a martyr. And in the end of the gospel, when Jesus is being crucified, it's not those two disciples who are beside him. It is two thieves.
It's two thieves, yeah.
So look at the irony, the complexity of the story, that two of his disciples say, I'm going with you, Lord, and let us sit at your right and your left. And he's going, do you know what it takes to sit at my right and my left? Here's the thief on a cross right next to me. You see?
Even the story of the thieves is different in different gospels. Sure. One of the story, the two thieves are sort of, cursing at him, and in another story, one actually accepts Jesus, and Jesus actually say, "Yeah, you're with me now."
Exactly.
That's all what it takes.
I actually think that because we know the Gospels are borrowing from the Old Testament scripture, really specifically from the LXX, the Greek Old Testament. They didn't know Hebrew, as far as we're aware. Maybe Matthew's Gospel knew some Hebrew, but seems like mostly they're drawing from Greek Old Testament. I think they're getting this passion motif from Joseph's story. You know the Joseph, the coat of many colors?
Yeah.
This story has all the elements, I think, that are needed for the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, and for the death scene with Jesus on the cross. And
Interesting.
I would even say with the resurrection and the whole spiel. I'll tell you if you want.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm very curious.
Okay. Real quick. So it's been long noted Joseph had 12 brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus has 12 disciples. Hopefully our viewers know the story of Joseph from the Bible. I know that you have probably a lot of a Muslim audience that may know of it, but I don't know if they've read the biblical story version. So
There's a full verse in the Quran. That's the
Uh-huh.
only verse in the Quran that is actually coherent and starts from the beginning to the very end, because the Quran is quite disjointed. They
Yeah.
start a story and then finish it elsewhere. The story of Joseph in the Quran is the most coherent and continuous story in the Quran. So it's
Awesome.
quite evident, and it's he was a handsome beast, in the Quran.
Yes. Yeah. Well, by the way, he was in the Bible.
Yeah.
And his looks, his beauty is what actually drew Potiphar's wife to want to make him sleep with her, force him. So the story goes, he's the favorite son of Jacob, the father of Israel. And his mom, I believe died giving birth to him, if I'm not mistaken, Rachel. The only son, I believe, or maybe, I can't remember. I could be wrong about these details, but 12 brothers. And he has dreams. And he's a dreamer. Long story short, his brothers don't like him. Okay. They're jealous. They don't like him. His dad loves him and favors him over all of them. I can't imagine 12 brothers and you're the only one that the dad cares about on that level. But that's because of his love for his mom. So according to the text, he loved her. That's his favorite son. So he's going to go check on his brothers one day, and his brothers capture him. They're pissed because he had just interpreted two dreams. One is where these wheat shafts, these wheat stalks, bow down to him. And then another one is the sun, moon, and the stars, which the sun you could represent as his father, Jacob. The mom, I guess you could say, would be the moon. I mean, maybe that's just some other character, but it's just using celestial language, and the stars bow down to him. Even his dad was like, bro, you took that shit too far, bro. Don't do that. So he even got on to Joseph about this. He's like, Dad, it was my dream. I can't help that I had this dream. So I'm giving you the full skinny here, but you can see the gospel in this, and I'll show you why. I'll emphasize as we get there. He goes to his brothers. His brothers capture him, and they want to kill him. But one of the brothers among them, named Judah, says, no, let's not kill him. Let's sell him. Judas sells Jesus. Judah says, let's sell him.
How much? The money, 30 pieces of silver, I guess.
One is 30 pieces in the New Testament. I believe it's 20 in the Old.
20, okay.
Okay, that makes it so different that it's not borrowing. I doubt it, okay? So in that moment, they throw him into a pit.
Yeah.
Now, I want to emphasize something, too, that the Bible does that we've noticed, and scholars have done this for centuries now. It takes these myths that it's borrowing from, Gilgamesh, Enuma Elish, you name it, and it demythologizes those myths in story form. What it does is it historicizes myth. So what you have is myth that is historical myth, meaning it's not dragons and centaurs. It's not men doing incredible things. They try to make it realistic myth.
Yeah, it's a human drama. It's what we love. It's what we. Yeah. It's like we're watching soap opera. It's great. Yeah.
Now there is sometimes the element of mythology pops its head out significantly, with Moses splitting the Red Sea, or the 10 plagues or, crazy manna coming up from the earth. The list goes on and on. The same way, if we were reading Homer's Odyssey, you're going to find very mundane, normal, historicized myth. And then out of nowhere, there's like a dragon or there's like a one-eyed cyclops or some crazy thing. And you're like, whoa, okay. That's what the Bible does. I just needed to make that background knowledge. So when someone is throwing someone in a pit, the language pit should give you the idea of death. It's like Sheol. It's the grave. It's in the earth. Just like Jonah was swallowed in the belly of the whale, he's in the pit. He's in Sheol. So there's a metaphorical or a symbolic death already. Now, why would I even go that far? Because right after they put him in the pit and then they take him out to sell him, they go back to his dad with ripped clothes and blood all over it saying he's dead.
Yeah.
So to the dad and to his brothers, for all that matters, he is dead.
We have an Arabic saying innocent as the wolf of Jacob's son.
Right.
So it's basically, I think they blame the wolves in the Quran that they actually ate him or devoured him, and here's his shirt and is sort of signs of him bleeding and to death.
Right.
And sorry, we tried to save him, but we couldn't. That's the story in the Quran.
Right. So he is dead as far as anyone's concerned, even though you, the reader, know he's alive. He's still thriving. He's holding on. And we all know that Joseph prospers everywhere he goes. That's a common theme. So he ends up in Egypt. Potiphar buys him. And Potiphar's house prospers because Joseph is so good. He's good with everything he does. Potiphar's wife lusts for him. Potiphar's wife says, ooh, he's hot. Come here, sleep with me. I cannot sin. Okay, he says, I'm not going to sin. I'm not going to sleep with you. She rips his clothing. He runs out naked. She accuses him of trying to, I'm not going to use it for YouTube's, the term, because of YouTube. And trust me, don't use the word on YouTube. It can eventually harm you. So he ends up getting thrown into a dungeon. Again, pit, dungeon, think death, because that's exactly what's going on. But even in the dungeon, bro, he's still the man. He ends up running the dungeon. He's so good that they end up putting him in charge of the dungeon, even though he is in it.
In the Quran, there's a slight different variation here. When she seduced him, he's actually was tempted. They actually were at it.
He was tempted?
He was at it. Like they were making out. In the Quran.
Okay.
They were making out, but then he saw evidence of God. Like, he saw a sign from God to say, okay, we'll stop. Yeah, so he was tempted he was like kind of first base.
Yeah. Well, at least, who knows? The Bible doesn't give you that detail as far as I can tell. I'm reading translations, so maybe there's something in the Hebrew that rabbis have picked up on that I haven't. So he's in the dungeon. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is when you start to really see the gospel, okay? Joseph's in the dungeon, and two men get thrown in the dungeon one day. And they're over here talking. And one of them's like, man, I had a dream last night. Joseph overhears dream? Huh? He's a dreamer. And God gave him the interpretation of dreams, the power to interpret dreams. So he's like, hey, guys, listen. Can you imagine some oddball coming up? Listen, I have the gift of interpreting your dreams. God gave it to me. I'd be like, yo, what is happening? Strange. But this guy approaches and he says, hey, I can interpret your dreams. Tell me your dream. And the first guy goes. And the first guy is the cupbearer of the Pharaoh himself. He tells a dream. I had this vine, I think he said it was like a vine of cluster of grapes on my head. 3 clusters of grapes that were on my head. Something to do with that. And then ultimately Joseph's like, hey, look, I can interpret this dream. In 3 days, catch that, bro. 3 clusters, 3 days. In 3 days, you will be lifted up. The language in that is lifted up. And you'll be back in the house of Pharaoh being the cupbearer like nothing ever happened. You're going to be right back in the king's house serving him wine. Wow. The second guy's like, that was a good interpretation. I'm going to tell you my dream now. I sure hope that I get a good one, right? So then he tells, and he says, I had 3 baskets on my head of bread. and the birds of the air flew and they ate the baskets off of my head. And Joseph tells him the dream, and holy shit, it's not nice. He says, in 3 days, your head will be lifted up and put on a pike, and the birds of the air are going to eat the flesh off your skin. Like you're just going to eat you.
Crows. Yeah.
Yes. So in 3 days, that happened. The wine bearer ends up getting back into the house of Pharaoh, and the baker ends up dying. One is condemned, one is forgiven. Okay? Now catch this. As the wine bearer is leaving the dungeon, this is in the book of Genesis, Joseph stops him and says, listen, don't forget me. Do remember me. Remember me where you go.
My goodness. Are you talking about the blood of Jesus and the body of Jesus?
Yes,
that's
100%.
That's the Eucharist.
100%, bro.
Jesus Christ.
It's literally in the book of Genesis. So I know it's not blood. It doesn't say blood, but blood is wine. And,
wine, yeah.
And so is bread. Bread is his body, right? So when Jesus breaks bread and wine, and then he says, do this in remembrance of me, okay? Turn to Genesis. I'm going to pull up Genesis now. Let me find out the exact verse. What verse in Genesis has, I'm doing ChatGPT, has Joseph, I think it's Genesis 30 something, but I could be wrong, maybe 40 something. Joseph say, remember me to the wine bearer or the cupbearer of the Pharaoh. And then
wow, this is very interesting.
Yeah, Genesis 40. So check this out. I'm going to pull up Cross Bible. If you haven't used Cross Bible, bro, it's a buddy of mine's website that he created. Man, this is such an awesome site. I hope people will start to use. Let's do this. Let's go Genesis. We are there. 48 or 40. Sorry. I think it's 40, right? Let me see. Yeah, 40. Okay. And then it's verse. Okay, Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took it. He's telling the dream, right? Then he says, within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. You will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as he used to when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. So this remember me stuff. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being in a dungeon. Jesus is, of course, according to the Gospels, being innocently accused, and they're trying to kill an innocent man, according to the Gospel. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, remember, oh man, a great interpretation. Hey, I too had a dream. Tell me, on my head there were 3 baskets, blah, 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 blah. Boom. On the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday. All right. Oh, yeah, here it is. Impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Cool. They kill him, right? Now, on the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a feast for all the officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. So after 3 days, boom, this happens, right? He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that once again he put the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Jesus is trying to say, don't forget me, right? He's mimicking. Whoever wrote these myths knew this story and is imitating it. I think this is creative literary imitation. Some will go, well, then he might have known the story, and then he just literally historically reenacted this actual story. It's, to me, that's less likely that that's what's happening here.
But you know, this is very akin to, and I can see the literature elements. It's like having nuggets in a movie. You know, when you watch a movie and it's paying tribute to an old movie, and there are some nuggets, you know, some Easter eggs.
That's what I see.
Inserted on purpose to say, hey, well, I'm paying tribute to that old story, or I'm a continuation, of the same, paradigm.
I agree. And I think that what ends the story off to this idea of Jesus is once he dies, by the way, remember the 2 thieves, okay? This is necessary for the Eucharist. So he breaks, one is bread, one is wine. One in the Joseph story is brought back up into the kingdom. Another is condemned. When you read the gospel of the two thieves, one of them is mocking Jesus, saying, if you are the Son of Man, bring yourself
Yeah.
down. Why don't you prove it? The other one is saying, Lord, when you enter your kingdom, he says, remember me. And Jesus says to that thief, you will be with me in paradise. Today, you will be with me in paradise. So one of them is going to be in the kingdom. One of them is condemned. It's just like the dreams of the two guys in the dungeon in Joseph's story. And then Jesus, once he dies and ascends to heaven in the Gospels, is seated at the right hand of God the Father. Joseph in the Old Testament rises out of death, out of the dungeon eventually, and he's seated at the right hand of Pharaoh. He's literally the right-hand man of the most powerful man on
That's
earth.
true. That's true. That's true. Even the
So
Quran. Yeah,
there's
that's
overlap.
this is this not just an overlap. I mean, this is this the similarity is uncanny. I mean, you got to be a fool not to see the similarities.
Right.
And it, but you know, a lot of people don't know that the Old Testament took about 700 years to
Right.
write. You know, like hundreds of years, and so it's not just overnight. So you have time to develop a narrative. The same for the Gospels. We don't know how long they've taken. They might have taken at least few decades. And there's there are some reflection to be made. So we're connected to the God the Father, the Judaism. Let's read it very well. These were Jewish people. These were very learned Jewish people who sort of created this new narrative, a heresy of Judaism.
I
And they
would even
must have.
I don't know if they were Jewish. I really question now Paul would be, but
But at least they must have Jewish consultants if they're
well,
cooking something up.
I think they know they're aware of some of this stuff. For sure. They're educated. But like there's some red flags, Richard C. Miller and others, Dennis McDonald, scholars that I've
Yeah,
been listening to for a while, who say there might be reason to think that they're if they we don't know the ethnicity or the group of the author, okay? But
yeah.
who the writings are for doesn't seem to be Jews at all, it seems, because when you're looking at it, there's stuff in the gospels where they go, and this is what the Jews do when they practice such and such. That's
And
like
third per- third
telling you
person.
in your culture you were raised in something about what you guys do on a regular basis. You don't need to tell us that. We know that. An example, it'll go, it is written. To Jews, you don't need to tell them this is written by this person. You don't need to give them the cue. Well, the prophet so and so says, you don't need to do that. They know this. And so there's a lot of cues in the gospels, according to these scholars, that give off the signs that these authors are not intending this to be for Jews at all.
What about Hellenized Jews? So
Yeah,
like,
could be.
like Josephus,
Could be Hellenized Jews, could be in some way sympathetic Gentiles that aren't
Yeah,
Jews
yeah,
who know about the material and are crafting their own stories. It could be either way. I just
yeah.
don't like, I just want to be cautious and say,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah. We cannot say anything with certainty. Look,
right.
when I had a conversation with Bart Ehrman, I think it was a couple of years ago, he was not as confident as Like I asked him the question directly. I said, "How confident are you?"
Yeah.
And I think the exact words were almost certainly, but not 100%. Like, okay, we have very very strong evidence, but I wouldn't be shocked if something that appears that proves me wrong, type of thing, because it's the end
Right.
of the day, it's evidence based scenario. So he was not, but uh,
Right.
um the conversation between mythicists and the classical theologians who believe Jesus was historical. I remember the Matt Dillahunty moderated Price and Bart Ehrman debate was quite interesting. Or, where are you leaning at the moment? Are you leaning towards what? You think Jesus existed, or some sort of a Jesus?
I don't know. Okay. I tend to think the model works that you could have mythologized a man, but I don't know. I would say that there probably was, but I'm also entertaining the idea that
It's not out of
I,
the question.
yeah, I don't know, bro. I tend to
Yeah.
think there was probably a Jesus, um, based on certain evidences that make me think that that could make the most sense of the data. But like, I cannot prove it and I do not know it. I think that what we're dealing with, though, is a literary fiction. So, the other day, this question that you just asked me, the way I answered it just now was like me being bona fide, absolutely raw, authentic, that maybe there was a guy that they based this on. But if truth be told, where I'm at is this is so mythical. This is such legendary, mythic, fictional material that the guy does not even matter.
Yeah, at this
So
point, yeah,
this
agreed.
that's why
Yeah,
this question to me, to be honest,
agreed.
the
Agreed.
question doesn't even matter to me anymore, because it's like saying, pretend there was a Clark Kent. But Clark didn't work in a newspaper. Let's pretend Clark was like a farm boy in Illinois or some, Indiana or something. Okay. He didn't even have the profession that Superman has in the real historical Clark Kent.
Gets his name, Cal L.
Right.
His real name L. It's dead.
Ah. Yeah, but like, I guess I'm getting at is like, I just don't discern historicity out of this material, and at
Yeah.
best, if there's a guy underneath it all, he's irrelevant
Do you know
because
what?
yeah,
I'm so glad you said that. It's irrelevant. I'm dealing with the consequences of believers at this point, of what are they doing on the back of that belief.
yeah.
It's a beautiful academic debate that can be had, but to me, it's superfluous at the moment. I don't care for it too much whether it exists or not. It's his words that I'm worried about.
To me, it feels more like a distraction based on my experience online now for 5 years dealing with this question, maybe 6 years now since I started MythVision. It was a great question, very interesting. It popped my bubble. It made me mind blown at first. You mean the guy I believe that was God in the flesh who really existed, that was, you know, may not have even existed? Like, blew my mind, right? Where I'm at now is I think this is a distraction amongst other critical thinkers of the Christian persuasion, because what apologists do, they weaponize mythicism against historicism, and they try to get guys who think there was a Jesus, like Bart Ehrman, to side more with the apologist side of going, no, there was a guy. They like to quote mine Bart and go, Bart says it's ridiculous to think there wasn't a guy. Ha ha ha. And I'm thinking about what's like when you have a decision to make between these dichotomies, right? Here we are with the trilemma. Here's a dichotomy. Historical Jesus, well, there was a guy. Well, you're closer to the Christians, the apologists, because they say there was a guy, but they need there to have been a guy. At least they act like they do. And then the other side, oh, well, those are those phony pseudo uh, conspiracy theorists over here that are called mythicists. What's ironic is the historicists that are critical would say most of the material is mythical. It didn't happen. So they're very close to mythicists in many ways, but they think there was really a dude underneath it or behind it, or they say some of the material in the Gospels they think goes back to the guy.
Do you
Okay.
know? Sorry, Derek. Finish the sentence, and I'll let you know something very interesting that is happening in the Muslim world at the moment. It's very similar, but finish your sentence,
Okay.
please.
Yeah. So, they get close to the mythicist, but then what the apologists like to do is quote the historicist against mythicists to call them out, make them look like they're idiots. And what's really funny is these two fighting that are more on the skeptical side, but one thinks there was a guy and one thinks there wasn't, should pause the fighting for a second. Look at the guy who says a virgin conceived, guy walked on water, he multiplied bread and fishes, he died 3 days later as a corpse, he resurrected and then floated up into a cloud, and one day you think he's going to come back on a cloud? Like,
Yep.
who's the conspiracy theorist now? You
Yep.
literally believe all of this, but you're mocking the guy who actually sincerely goes, I see so much mythology, I can't be overly confident that this guy existed. That to
Yeah.
me is at least a decent position to take.
Well,
And
look, absolutely,
you see what I'm
absolutely.
saying?
In Islam right now, there is a new movement trying to challenge academically, trying to challenge the classical belief of historicists. In terms of the Quran, when was it actually written? Was Muhammad even a person?
Right.
Or was he a Frankenstein of different people stitched together to create a certain persona? Even the place of Islam altogether has been challenged archaeologically. So I've
Right.
got a Muslim scholar coming. He's like the Bart Ehrman of the no, more like Robert Price, because he's more of a mythicist. He does not believe that all these people were historical.
Even Muhammad?
If Muhammad was, there are elements that a warlord
Yeah. So he's kind of
existed.
like there was a guy named Jesus who ran around and was apocalyptic, but everything
Yeah,
else was made up
never.
about him. And okay.
Yeah, but even the time, like, like, so very similar to Finkel, Israel Finkelstein, the Israeli archaeologist who said,
Right.
wrote about the Exodus, said, well, look, these are exaggerated, probably never happened, and if elements of this happened, it's happened centuries after the event. Like, there is
Right.
the alignment isn't there whatsoever. So I'm very glad that they're because sometimes it can be a monopoly of
Yeah.
thought in academia. And I'm very glad there are people who would come up and say, hey, I'm going to challenge, because we are the winners of this particular debate. I want to know the truth, and I want as much debate
Yep.
and nobody to get cancelled or being called cuckoo heads because they're saying, well, I've got some different idea and I've got some evidence that I want to demonstrate. And people say, oh, how dare you, saying, what's the name of our common friend, Richard, the guy, another mythicist, who
Richard
would say,
Carrier.
Richard Carrier,
Yeah.
the crucifixion in the sky,
Yep.
that one that was, and it might sound like really left field to a lot of people. Say, what the hell are you talking about,
Right.
but it needs to be entertained. I want to listen in, and I want, you don't have to.
100%, brother. It needs to be on the table. It needs to be seriously paid attention to and considered, even if you, at the end of the day, are not persuaded. It needs to be there. And because it's so politically motivated, and I'm not talking about necessarily like right-wing, left-wing politics. I'm talking about within the field of biblical studies, there is this kind of politics of like mythicists are not allowed. Like there is it's who you know kind of thing too. There's this social crowd and they're guiding the path on who's accepting what kind of material is being considered seriously in the academic arena. And yeah, there's a power struggle in the field. It's not necessarily about argumentation. There are schools of different thought amongst the academics that they don't agree with. And I see it. I see it.
Yeah.
I hear it. I've interviewed many scholars. They have different methods. There's different approaches, and
But
one is frowned upon often.
yeah, like, just even think with me about this here. We can take a kind of modernish historical figure with a religious sect, the Mormons, Joseph Smith, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't too far away.
No.
History was being written then, yeah? A convicted felon, a con man, right? We knew about that. He was a treasure hunter,
Mhm.
with the magic seeing eye and the Book of the Mormon in hieroglyphs, which is
Yeah. Okay,
Egyptian.
Abraham. Yeah.
Yeah. He believes in three separate persons. He actually got to meet God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit in separate persons. And we know, so we kind of have elements of how the story. Now, Joseph Smith is revered among the Mormons. He's a prophet of God. But we know that he was a convicted felon. He was taking donations from very rich people to look for treasures and and stuff, weird stuff like that. Maronai, the very convenient angel, they used to come and update the system to 2.01 or 2.02 because black people were not permitted. Now they're permitted because the social compass has moved a bit. Also, what was it? Polygamy. Now it's oh no, God has has updated the system. You can see, because this is a modern day religion being manufactured. So it's an offshoot from Christianity, and you can see Joseph Smith existed, but he was nowhere near what he claimed to be.
Yeah. That he has a trilemma too. People have painted in the past. Dr. Bob actually wrote an article about this.
Yeah.
And you know how you pointed out he's a con man. He's a liar. There's a lot of people who would say he's a liar. Yet he believed his lies.
Yep.
So
He died for it.
He died. Yeah, he died. Now
Killed for it.
they've gone through persecution in other states, which, by the way, I think they also self-inflicted themselves with it because they were out there proselytizing to people that didn't want to hear their BS. So there was a lot of crap that's happened, and this guy stuck true to his guns and all the way to the end. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, he's different though. We have like such clear data, whereas the reason. Okay, so how do we prove Jesus existed? We quote Paul, and they try to anchor Paul into the first century in the 50s. And they'll say Paul mentioned Jesus' brother, which there's a debate over that, where some say that his brother wasn't necessarily. Yeah, brother of the Lord could have been just a fictive kinship and not a biological. And funny thing is, later Christians literally made that argument that it was a cousin because they don't want Jesus to have biological brothers because they don't want Mary to have had other kids. She needs to stay a perpetual virgin, right? So there's all this debate. And at the end of the day, all we're saying is give me that first century archaeological data that this guy existed. And if you could pin him to the first century, not because, oh, well, Josephus mentions in contested mentionings by scholars, we're wondering if they inserted this material. Like that's debated. Tacitus about, like there's different quotes that they love to go to that prove the historicity of Jesus. By the time they're writing this, they're also probably aware of Christian beliefs about the Jesus character. So it's just debatable is all.
And I can also understand why would history not write about just a man, because he was not because back in the day, unless you're a king or a Caesar or nobody would know about you. So it's an era in the world where history was not written about normal people. But after he died and became a thing, then people started writing. So I can understand why he was not written about immediately.
Of course. That's the thing, though. It's kind of like the God of the Gaps-ish argument, okay? It's like, oh, well, he could have. And, most people weren't written about that weren't kings or major popular political figures, sure. And that is true. It's a fact, but it also doesn't lend credibility to his existence just because that was the common way. It's like saying there was a guy named Casper in the first century too. And then you go, well, prove he didn't exist or prove that he did exist. And I said, well, how? How can I? Most people weren't written about that actually did exist. That argument doesn't help you prove he did exist. It just says, well, we can't expect there to have been evidence of his existence in writing around that time. You would think there's some data in the Gospels that he might have left some archaeological data or something. And there have been some scholars who think that they may have discovered the family tomb of Jesus. That they may know that's still something that is being in the works, if you might say. Dr. James Tabor, I think, is working on a couple Talpiot tombs that might actually go back to this time. And what is the conclusion there? I could see mythicists too. They get pretty worked up about this because they're arguing so much with the opposite side that they hold to it like a belief. And it's like, not all, but some. And I think to myself, suppose we found the tomb of Jesus and his family and the sarcophagus. We found the bones of Jesus. That's not helping Christianity, dude. He's dead. Like, you would think you'd let go of your mythicism if that's the case and just say, hey, he didn't rise from the dead. He's dead. This debunks your stuff anyway because he didn't rise. No, they're so stuck and infatuated, some of them, on needing Jesus to not have existed, like it's a belief system, that if evidence did come that somehow proved he did exist, they'd lose their minds or just neglect the evidence.
We kind of have some evidence. I mean, do you have this dude still floating around, the Shroud of Turin guy?
He's still around somewhere, bro. I have like 15 fake accounts I've had to block. I'm like, I'm annoyed. Block.
This is an interesting question from Hypatia. What do you think about Paul's letters? What are they? 20, the year 20, so the earliest possible writings about Jesus, and this Shaul, that's his Hebrew name, and Paul is his Greek name, because a lot of people think the name has been changed after the revelation, but it wasn't. He was known by both names. One is the Hebrew name, and one is the Greek name. He was a persecutor. And suddenly he's got this vision on the way to Damascus. Very special guy, and
makes Christianity a universal religion rather than to the lost sheep of Israel type of scenario. It's open now to the world. What's your
Yeah.
interpretation of Paul? What's his role in the whole story?
Yeah, he sees himself, according to these texts, he is painted as a last days prophet, and that his goal is to bring in the nations. He's trying to gather in people from among the nations, because some of the prophets said in the last days the end can't happen till you get people from the nations to come in to believe. So he's actively pursuing non-Israelites, non-Jews, and bringing them in so that he could fulfill scripture. Hypatia says,
Oh
are
my!
Paul's letters what? Well, go ahead.
So this is very interesting. So it's induced. He's trying to
Yeah.
induce.
Yeah. It's like modern Zionism. And I'm talking about within evangelical circles. I'm
Interesting.
not trying to get political. I'm just making the point. Like,
Yeah.
Christians are motivated to make sure that that third temple gets built, or that Jews go to the Holy Land, in order to coerce God's hand, in order to act in human history to cause the end to happen. This is what Paul's doing with the Gentiles. He's going out, according to what I'm seeing, is he's actively pursuing to fulfill scripture and to bring that final end about. You got to gather in the nations. You have to. And
So
he believes that the Jews are jealous of it. So he thinks, if I can get the nations to believe, the Jews will be jealous, and then the Jews will come around and they'll accept my message of Jesus. Like today, they're not accepting it. So maybe if we get enough of people in the world to become Christians, or he
yeah.
didn't use the term Christian, but to believe in his Christ, that Jews will finally believe in him too. But I think Hypatia's question is a little different. Are Paul's letters a creation based on existing letters, completely interpolated to create this character? I don't know. I don't know if they're based on existing prior letters. I don't know. There's so much dispute and debate in.
Some are fake, right? We know some are fake. Out of the
Yeah.
13, only about 7 or 8 are.
It seems like the consensus of scholarship right now is saying, yeah, there's forged letters in the name of Paul, but they think there's 7 authentic. But there are scholars right now who are contending, even though they're not a consensus here, they're not like the majority, they question whether or not Paul wrote any of them. And this is not a new idea. This was something that the Dutch radicals already questioned centuries ago, where they were already saying Paul did not write all these letters. Some of them questioned that Paul wrote any of them. Some of them thought Paul only wrote 4 of them. Eventually, people posited that there were 7. There's a history of scholarship in this book, actually, that goes over this in depth, called The Letters of Paul in the Roman Literary Context. Ultimately, she posits that Paul's letters, all 13, if you count Hebrews, 14, but really 13 letters, are 2nd century. They're not 1st century. They're in the 2nd century. But one comment you made about Shaw and Paul that I want to bring to your attention, I don't think you've ever heard of, that's interesting. Again, there's an article called Better Call Paul Saul.
Yeah.
Okay, by a friend of mine named Michael Koshinosh. He's an academic who was a student of Dennis MacDonald.
It's a play on words on a TV series. Better Call Saul.
Better Call Paul Saul. Okay.
Yeah.
In it, he argues, because where do we see Paul's name as Saul in the New Testament? It only shows up in one place within the New Testament, Acts. None of Paul's letters use the word Saul for him. He is a Benjamite. He calls himself a Benjamite. Now, if Paul's letters are fictional, this makes perfect sense why they would label him a Benjamite after the book of Acts, because what do you see? I'll show you. When Paul, his name was Saul in the book of Acts, is persecuting Christians, he's heading to a new town on the road to Damascus. He gets knocked off or knocked to the ground. Some portray it as a horse. Some say he's just walking. He's knocked to the ground. 2 guys are with him. They hear, or they don't see, but they hear a voice. And the other accounts, it says that they saw, but they didn't hear. It contradicts. But anyway, in this moment, Jesus, in a blinding light, appears to Paul and says, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Okay. This should bring up an Old Testament text. Again, we talked about Joseph. In the book of Kings, I believe it is, 1 or 2 Kings. And I think you get a repeat of this story a little bit, but it's different from Samuel. in the book of Kings, David is being chased by King Saul. King Saul's sleeping in a cave. David comes up and cuts a piece of his cloth and then comes out on the hilltop and screams. Guess what David says?
Saul, like, calls his name.
He says, Saul,
Yeah.
Saul, why do you pursue me? Okay. The Greek for persecute and pursue are almost the same root. Okay.
Yeah, or almost same meaning too.
So what does the picture portray? You have a Benjamite. By the way, did you know King Saul was a Benjamite of the tribe of Benjamin?
Interesting.
Yeah. So you have a Benjamite against David. You have a Saul versus King David, and then you have a Saul versus the seed of David, the son of David, Jesus. So you literally have a literary creation from the Old Testament story where King Saul is trying to kill David. He's trying to kill him. You have Saul trying to kill Christians who are the body of Christ. They are Jesus in a sense. And Jesus is saying, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Guess what happens after that conversion? His name is changed. He's no longer called Saul ever again. He's called Paul. His name is now Paul. So this scholar says he doesn't think that Paul was ever named Saul. If there was a guy, he was just named Paul. But if you take Nina Livesey's work, she thinks that Paul is an invented character from the book of Acts. So when you read the letters of Paul, and he's a Benjamite and all that kind of stuff, she thinks he's building, this author of Acts is building on, the letters of Paul are building on the book of Acts to craft these letters. Bro, it's a mess, bro. But like, it's
hole gets deeper, mate. It's almost like the Matrix. If you follow me, and the rabbit hole gets deeper. There is no. But one thing that we can conclude from this, and we're probably gonna finish up in the next few minutes, guys. You cannot be certain about any of these allegations. You have to take everything with a pinch of salt.
For sure.
You'll have to stay agnostic until you see strong evidence. You might have preferred version or closer, but obviously supernatural is out of the questions. That's out of the window. Is whether these people really existed, but a lot of exaggeration happened afterwards, or they're completely manufactured from scratch. But then everything else remains the same. We've got Christians who do certain things based on that belief. We've got Muslims who do certain things based on belief. And things that happened 2,000 years ago, to me, I will never know for sure. But what I know for sure is the intercourse that we're having right now with the this intercourse. I'm thinking, note your thoughts. Discourse.
I'll tell you this. You brought up the supernatural. Look, if someone wants to bring that to the table, which, by the way, I like when scholars are like, I'm not going to waste my time on this. Let's just focus on what we all can agree on.
Yeah.
If you bring that to the table, you're opening up a whole nother can of worms, because I can get you eyewitness testimony from other claims of other gods who die and do miracles and all of this stuff. I can list it. You won't accept that, but you'll accept yours. And for me, bro, I'm not debating whether or not these things are miracle. It's not even on the table for me.
Yeah.
Like, it's more fictive. It's more literary. And if there is anyone who thinks they're superstitious, you could also say the con man aspect could be played into it. Like, I don't personally go down this path, but there were many people, like there are today in many countries, who pretend to have magical abilities or supernatural gifts. On TV, they're extending legs, they're healing people. There's the placebo effect that plays a role, and they go, "Oh, Benny Hinn healed me of my cancer." Then they die a month later.
Like that Indian guru Satya Baba, that Sam Harris talks about. The guy was like a living legend. He was doing miracles on camera, where camera recording, so it's even better. Gold. He used to take out gold from his mouth and give it to people, but later on, where you can actually see where the trick is. You can actually pinpointed what was happening.
So either way, you see, like, there's a bit of trickster involved in So however you want to paint it, either way, I leave that out of the question. But Hanny, this has been a pleasure, bro. It's been too long. You're a great host. You're excellent podcaster. I hope more people who might be watching from MythVision will subscribe and keep doing what you're doing, man. I really, really treasure this. I hope that we've had fun, and I hope you enjoyed this.
Oh, look, Derek, whenever we speak, I mean, we speak, guys, folks, we Derek and I were offline. This is exactly the way we converse. It's exactly, so it's, to me, it's like I'm in a coffee shop chatting to a friend about, and your perspective was so important to me because the amount of people you've interviewed over the years and from all different perspectives, and I know you are a professional content creator, by the way. My viewers from the Arabic world, if you're interested in MythVision, this full description in the description of the video here. Check out MythVision channel. It's a treasure. It's a wealth of information,
Yeah.
and you are going to leave a very strong legacy. You're a professional content creator, so this is how you make your living.
Yes, sir.
But it's almost like you're a professional footballer. You know, you love it. Like I can see when you're in the stream, you're not caring about what's the income or the super chat. You're literally having a chat with a scholar, and you want to know what's in their brain, and you become like a little child listening to these stories. And you are, you know, even though you're professional, but every time I see you in your broadcasts, I see somebody who's lapping up knowledge, and you'll never stop.
I want to always maintain that. You know, Jesus said, be like these little children, right?
Yeah.
I want to always be a student as much as I can and wrestle these ideas. Sometimes I'm confident about something, but like I am a student and I always am willing to change with the evidence, the data, and improve upon. I really appreciate that compliment, bro. That is my goal. And try to set that tone for the viewer who might be watching from home to also go, let me throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. Let me not take this too seriously. Enjoy your life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's the goal.
Completely agree. Derek, thank you so much. You're a wonderful man, and I really appreciate our friendship. Folks, as I said before, please check out the description of the video. You'll see MythVision's link. Check it out. The amount of information there is incredible. The number of scholars, and to be honest with you, if I want to see one of these scholars in a conference, you know, you've got to travel, you got to pay maybe a couple of $100 a ticket. And in this age, to be able to sit in your pajamas, sipping on a cup of hot cocoa, watching a thing and shouting out a content creator, you know, by sending a small donation, it goes a long way. And it makes sure that people like Derek will continue to pump up material and makes it so convenient and so economical. Honestly, I used to go to conferences and so on. The day would cost me about $300 to $400 by the time I paid the tickets and lunches and transportation. So I really have a very strong appreciation of content creator that will actually bring knowledge to your lounge or bedroom or wherever you're watching TV from.
Yeah,
so thank you again.
Support what you want to see more of. It's that simple. And I encourage people to find ways of support if they can't financially. You like the video, you share the video, you comment. By the way, when you comment, you're helping the algorithm. There's a lot of things you can learn as a person who may not be able to financially. I get it. This world is tough. It is. Clearly, whatever means you're able to is always good for people who work their butt off. And just a simple like, just a simple comment, and oftentimes the positive comment goes a long way. It really helps us when we wake up in the morning and I see a comment, I go, wow, you know what? I am like, I am important. I am valued. They respect me. I appreciate it. Sometimes you're going to get critical people, and you have to have thick skin. So, you know.
Critical isn't bad. It's just the way you portray it. You know, it's all right to stay critical, but stay kind. You can be critical and kind at the same time.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Thank you very much, folks. Until next time. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.